Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the InvestPod podcast. Today's guest is Derek Kinney. Derek is the founder of both the Good Money Framework and Success for Advisors after a very successful 25-year stint as an advisor himself, where he was a Forbes top 1% financial advisor. He's also the author, as you can see behind him, of the Good Money Revolution. Derek, thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure. Great to be with you, Cameron. Thanks for having me.
So Derek, when I was doing some research on you beforehand, I saw you put a little anecdote in another podcast that you got your start at a startup. Maybe to kick off this conversation, I'm curious the parallels between startup world and building your own financial advisor practice up.
Well, funny story, but it wasn't funny when it was happening. I learned a lot about starting my own business basically by doing what I said I would not do, what I saw the founder of the startup I worked for do. And let me give you a couple examples. On Friday, the boss would notoriously send out an email that said, hey, Saturday is going to be a work day. So I'd have to call my wife and say, hey, all the plans we made, scrap that. I've got to work tomorrow. And a lot of different things happened. But one of the biggest things for me was we were pushing out a big product. It was a big software contact manager back in the day. And we were working a lot of hours. And people were talking about the bonuses they were going to get once the product shipped. And we were all excited. My wife and I had an idea what we were going to do. And then it came time to pass out the bonuses. And I got passed over, as did two other customer service people. I was the one marketing person. It was only the engineers that got the bonuses. And they deserved it. I mean, they worked hard, they developed the code, but all of us put in this time and energy. And what it caused me to do, Cameron, it gave me this moment in time. And I realized I had to ask myself this key question. Do I want to stay in someone else's firm and basically hope for a 4% yearly raise, and that's going to be how they tell me what my value is? Or am I willing to take the chips and bet on Derek and give the wheel a spin? Now, I was 26 years old at the time, and I realized the time is now if I'm going to do this. And so that's what led me then to leave that startup firm and then actually at nighttime go back and study and get my financial planning licenses to become a financial advisor. I was young, people doubted me, said I didn't have enough money in the bank to do it, but I just had this passion. I loved working with money and investing it. And I thought, I see a lot of people struggling. I feel like I can help. But it's funny, now today, I think about that first job out of college often because I think the guy's name was Rich. I say to myself, okay, what would Rich do? Do the opposite of that and you'll be a better founder. But again, no finger pointing here. He was probably doing the very best he could. He was a gifted and strong analytic guy, but it was just the people skills left a lot to be desired. And what I've learned through that process is if you can get people on board with a passion, and if you treat them as though, look, I'm smart, but I'm hiring you because all of you are smarter to make all of us better, people purchase passion. They will go along, even if you don't pay them very much, as long as they're part of something big and they feel like they're respected and part of something big, they can make big things happen.
100%. It's funny, if I ever messaged my team that we're going to have to work on a Saturday, I think they would just laugh at me and wouldn't log in. I hear from advisors, because I came from a financial services background and then almost went and became an advisor myself. And I always heard the advice, don't do it unless you have a big network to tap into. So you hear folks who used to be in SaaS sales, they go out on their own, they tap into their network of whether it was previous clients or their niche is focusing in on other very high performing salespeople to build their book around. At 26, just 2 years probably after graduation, I'm assuming you probably didn't have that. How did you go about building up that book initially?
Well, initially I had a problem, and that was I had a passion inside to serve a lot of people, but I didn't know many people. I did not come from the gene pool of the popular kids. I did not have the country club membership. I didn't have the established family lineage that would lead me to all these naturally high net worth people. But what I did have was this passion for supporting local education. And it's kind of a crazy story, but it ends up really, really profitable. So when I was a senior in high school here in Arlington, Texas at Sam Houston High School, no one ever came back to our school who was successful and gave us a vision as to what our life could look like. Everybody just said, take your math and your science and your history and you do well in those and then you'll do well in life. And I sort of has had this suspicious thing like, I don't think that's really the whole story here. But nobody ever came back. And I said, I don't want that to happen anymore. So I went to the principal and said, look, I want to recognize a teacher of the month and a student of the month. So I gave the teacher a $50 Amazon gift card, the student a $25 Amazon gift card. And I just got to breathe life into these people and say, as a student here, I believe your best days are yet ahead. And to the teacher who was picked by the faculty, I said, you're the type of teacher that probably on Christmases and New Year's, years from now, it'll be your name that gets brought up. You're that person who made a big impact. And they had a big smile on their face. So when I left there, I just thought, look, this makes me feel good. I'm giving back. Well, back in those days, we had this technology called newspapers, okay, the kind of this papery kind of stuff. And so I got a picture with the principal and the teacher and the student myself, and it went into the newspaper. Well, I did this several months and I got a phone call, and it was this phone call, Cameron, that changed how I thought about business. And this woman said, Derek, we want you to be our financial advisor. And she said, we know you're young, we know you're new, but you care about what we care about. She said, you care about what we care about. And it was in that moment I realized, oh, I didn't have to be the smartest. I didn't have to be the best looking. I didn't have to be the most well connected. I just needed to care about what my ideal clients cared about. And it turned out a lot of them liked supporting local education. And what I realized was these high net worth people that I most wanted to work with, they weren't coming to our office because of my vast knowledge and all these great investment returns. They did well and we returned their calls and emails and so forth. But what they wanted was they want their money to grow, but they wanted to be part of something bigger. And so by working with us, they knew that they were helping make our community better. So whenever competitors' calls came in or they got that invitation for the steak dinner about retirement, it was like a moat. They knew, no, I don't want to work with you. I work with Derek and his team because we're part of something bigger. So what it taught me was I was able to prospect and attract high net worth people very easily. We had a high profit margin because we weren't spending money on, ads or different marketing things. It was referrals, but it was based on helping solve a relatable problem. And I'll talk about that more a little bit later, but that was really the key to our growth as a financial planning business.
Very interesting. So would you say a lot of that came down to storytelling within how you presented that value, or because your name was already out there, they associated you with that external value and you didn't even have to sell them anymore. They came in already bought into the mission.
Well, it's funny. I wish that was the case. When I got licensed, I thought I would need to get a phone because all of these call-ins are going to be overwhelming. I would have to have a separate line here, and that didn't happen. I would always have my office overlooking a highway. And the reason I did that was every day in Arlington, Texas, there were new people moving in who had never ever heard of Derek Kinney before. So I needed to always be marketing ABM. And then every day people might be leaving to go somewhere else in the country and I would never see them again. So all the marketing I did, that left with them. So the lesson was always be marketing and never assume that anybody really knows who I was. And so one of the early decisions I made is I thought, I'm young, but I love communicating and people would tell me, Derek, you seem to have this knack for taking complex ideas and making them easy to understand. And I thought, a TV audience would be perfect for this. And so I would get into the office early, and once a week I would send a fax back in the old days to the local TV producers. And I said to them, hey, when you need someone to talk about financial topics in an easy to understand way, call me. And I gave them a couple sample topics. Hey, 3 ways to crush your debt, 4 ways to save for retirement, et cetera, et cetera. People like the numbers because it's catchy. But one day I got a call from the local CBS affiliate here in Fort Worth. And they said, Derek, we know you love to be on TV. Could you come on and talk about this topic? And I said, sure, love to be on TV, having never been on TV before. And the lesson that I learned is, and this has helped me in business, and it may help some of your listeners as well. Some founders will often get drowned in the details about, I've got to get this perfect, then I take it to market. And what I learned is sometimes you take it to market, you take the concept to market before the idea is even fleshed out. And that's what happened with the TV for me is I just practiced and practiced, but I had this visualization in my mind that when the interview was done, the producer would say, Derek, you are made for TV. We want to have you on a regular basis. And the interview went great. And it was almost those exact words. She said, man, where have you been? We would love to have you on. You're like made for TV. And so it was that momentum that then allowed us to combine the cause that people cared about and gave me great credibility. But what I then learned was, and this is something that really held me back as an advisor initially, whenever people would ask me, what do you do for a living? Oh, Cameron, it was like poking my eyeballs out. I would say I'm a financial advisor. Literally, you could see people go comatose right in front of you. They wanted to get out of the conversation as fast. And what I learned was when you say that, all of us have this mental checklist in our mind that people go through. If I say I'm a financial advisor, well, you might say, well, oh my gosh, my friend got burned by a financial advisor, or all you sell is insurance and all you do is sell high priced mutual funds. Without me even saying anything or being able to control it, there's this checklist you're going through, and it's not fair. So what I found is the antidote was to relate to people with a relatable problem. In other words, what is the pain point that your ideal clients face right now that if I say that, they will immediately connect? So let me give you an example. Let's say I was talking to a fellow dad, and I were to say to that dad, does it ever feel like when you talk to your daughter that it goes in one ear and out the other? Well, instantly, that dad will say, yes, I know exactly what you're saying. And so it's that visceral response that you're going for. So what I learned is when I would go back over my 5 recent clients and my 5 favorite clients, I like to do that for a kind of a recency test, is I discovered most of them were worried about running out of money in retirement. So when people would ask me, what do you do for a living? I would say, well, Cameron, you know how so many people worry about running out of money in retirement? As I slightly kind of nod my head and they're like, yes, they immediately get it. We have a 3-step plan that helps people create the retirement they want and give them the confidence to not run out of money. We specialize in retirement income planning. Let me stop there. The point of that is that conversation when they say, what do you do for a living, is a doorway for you to connect relationally with a core problem that they immediately connect with. And what you're doing is now you begin to own mental real estate that when they have that problem or a friend of theirs does, they think of you.
That's very interesting. You raised an interesting point in there. I remember my dad got burned by a advisor who put him in some like penny stocks before. And I think I even said to myself, I'm never going to invest. I don't want anything to do with this industry. And I think it took probably 3 or 4 years after that to be like, no, I want to get into this space and avoid, have it so my dad can avoid those sorts of traps. Because
Yes.
to your point, I always likened that investment advisor, or at that time stockbroker, with bad financial decisions. And now the people we work with, to your point, very focused on the planning side, moved away from, I think every advisor's moved away from stock picking and putting their value around that now because it's a losing game. You mentioned an interesting point on you found your ICP, your ideal customer. What do you have any advice for advisors on how to figure that out? Like if you are a new grad and you just did your CFP exam and you're now a CFP, you want to be in this space, but you don't necessarily know who you want to work with or what that specialty is, how they can identify that.
Well, yeah, there's a couple ways. One of the things that people will often say is, well, find a niche. Just find a niche in the niches or the riches. And I buy into that to a certain degree. But one of the things, like let's say that you're in a conversation, you say, well, we specialize in working with doctors. Well, automatically, then you exclude everyone who's not a doctor automatically. But now for a doctor, you may say, well, that's nice that you focus on just doctors, but what else is there? So if you're going to focus on that, then you want to find a painful problem that doctors have. So one may be, we specialize, well, for example, I might say, how doctors they make quite a bit of money, but they're worried about how will they have enough to retire. Now, let me redo that. Okay, kind of we're doing this real time here. So what we want to do is come up with an emotion. So let's say, for example, how many doctors make a lot of money, but they're worried about spoiling their kids because they haven't earned any of it. Well, we help them work through that. You see, that's a concern that many doctors would have is, look, I'm super successful and I put in the time, but I don't want to just hand this to my kids. And especially entrepreneurs are the same way. So it's important to identify what is a pain point, not just who do I want to work with, teachers or engineers or whatever that may be, but what is the pain point, the real visceral issue that keeps that person awake at night? Now, one thing that I will tell new advisors, especially the next gen or people who are brand new to the industry, oftentimes the biggest mistake they make is to try to oversell themselves and make themselves look smarter or sound more experienced or like they have more knowledge than other people. That's why it's important to replace I with we. Replacing I with we in every conversation is vital because people can sense out, okay, you look like you're 23. How much real financial experience do you really have is what people are thinking. And so we don't want to have to fight that, but instead we step into that and just say, at our firm, what we specialize in is, and it's funny, one of the reasons they hired me, I'm 24, they hired me, the young person, because they want me to bring in some of this cutting edge knowledge so that we live longer than our clients and bring them the latest and greatest financial tools. So I'm part of this great team. So the whole point of that is so many people shy away from their age. They try to hide it and camouflage it. But when you say we, then you position yourself as, look, I'm actually young and that's my competitive advantage to help you, the client. Well, suddenly now you're like, oh my gosh, this sounds great because everybody wants to not be, sort of, they don't want their advisor to die before they do. They want to make sure that they've got people around them that can help guide them along all of life's paths. So I would just encourage you to look at who you are, what is your strength, replace I with we, but also just identify. And I like to do this with advisors when I do private workshops, and that is I'll ask people, identify who your 5 most recent clients are and what problem they came to you to have you help solve for them. And then identify the 5 favorite clients you got. The people, when you see their name on your calendar, you're excited because they take every piece of advice you give them. They love you. What problem did they bring to you? That's what I call the recency test. That tells you right now your trend line as to who the clients are that are most attracted to you. And then you have to ask yourself, is that the client I want to work with? And if not, then you can pivot. But that's your real life focus group on the cheap telling you, here's why we're paying you to help us.
Very, very relatable point. Again, another anecdote. When I was at the bank, we would do webinars with like institutional clients and advisors on like our views of the market and whatnot. And I'd be on the phone day in, day out talking with advisors. And when I've had a webinar, it was the first time they actually saw me. And one of the guys called me up. He's like, I didn't know you were a kid. You need to wear some glasses and grow a beard out. I can't trust you. And here I am sitting on this call with a beard and with glasses on now.
That's
So
funny.
I'm still damaged a little bit from that 7 years ago.
But it goes to the perception people have of us. That's the
Yeah, you
amazing.
think gray beard and like a suit and everything comes with like status and knowledge, but how do you bridge that relatability gap or that perceived knowledge gap when you're a younger advisor starting out? Um, sorry.
Well, you made me think of something, and that is sometimes what often causes advisors to be held back is how they think people are hearing them speak. For example, As I work with these leaders of top 1% practices around the country, I'll tell them, look, you guys are crushing it and you're doing a great job leading what you're doing, but I know you want that extra $1 million or the next $5 million. You just need some tweaks. And some of the tweaks I'll bring to the table will be how they use the words they say. So, for example, if someone asks me a question and I'm in with a client and I begin to talk about how I get paid, let's talk about how our firm gets paid. It's sort of like when you randomly call on the guy in church or somebody gets caught off guard and they're asked to do something and their voice goes up like 10 octaves. It's the deepest voice person and you can tell they just sound nervous. Well, that nervousness then goes to the client and the prospect and they begin to feel nervous. It's just this revolution of nervousness. And what I find is the way to counteract that is low and slow. So when someone asks me, "Hey, Derek, what do you do for a living?" I'll just pause for a second and I take this mentality of I'm a doctor that has the medicine for the painful problem that is literally killing you. And I'm about to describe it to you. So I'm no longer this salesman-ish financial advisor. I'm literally a problem solving gift giver to you. And so I'll talk to them and I'll say, you know how so many people, a little bit lower, and when you talk lower, it draws people in like, this is going to be really interesting. And when you talk slower, you automatically sound more authoritative, whatever you're talking about. So many people worry about running out of money in retirement, right? Well, and then boom. So the whole point of that is you're like this deliberate person who they can tell, boy, this person is serious. And you want to come across like you're carrying this worry that, look, you may not be worried about this, but I'm worried for you because of all the other people like you that I've helped with this. And so those are some ways I like to say that words equal wealth. And the right words spoken at the right time, said to the right person, describing the right painful problem can lead to great profits.
Totally agree. Funny, when you were doing that to me just now, I was resisting. I was trying to draw in because you got low and I knew what you were doing, but it still wrote me into the conversation, into that process. On that note, do you find between intergenerational now, like where, advisors will have to start working more with millennials, soon it'll be Gen Zs. There's a different shift in how you have to sell that clientele from like a boomer and Gen X versus a millennial and Gen Z individual.
Well, there is. I mean, obviously, there needs to be a more adeptness to technology and communication. But ultimately, what I find is there are certain core values. This is where Maslow, I think, can really help all of us. If we can live at the top of that pyramid all the time and ask ourselves, even the most successful person in your community, the person who you think just drips money off of them, they all have this deep seated desire to be understood, to be valued, to be respected, to be admired. Those are all the key things. And so, for example, when I was our local Rotary Club president a couple years ago, I made it a point that whenever someone was out, if I saw them in the meeting again, I would call them out from the podium. Hey, Jim Smith, we've missed you. It's so great to see you. And a big smile would come across their face. They were recognized and they were acknowledged. And what I learned is that so many people assume, well, they've got everything. What do they need? Well, what they need is what money can't buy: love, respect, admiration, etc. And so what I find is the one question that we find is now transcending the different generations of money is just asking people, whether they're Gen X or millennials, whatever it is, hey, what is it that you want for yourself? What is it that you want? And then a follow-up would be, if you and I were having a drink together, whether it's coffee, Topo Chico, a whiskey, whatever your favorite drink is, 12 months from now, and you're looking back over the year, what do you want to have happen for you to say, working with Derek was one of the best decisions I made? And then you just sit there and listen to what they tell you. And the point of all that is you can let people figure out, okay, what is it that you want? Because culture today, social media tells you you need to be this. And if you're not that, you're a failure and you're not going to be successful. You need to be walking on the sands of Bali right now, living on $5 a day. And you're 21, you should have been doing this at 18. And you feel like you're behind the ball. So all of those pieces are very, very important, just that communication. And what I find is when people can feel like someone hears me, and then what I would do is automatically within the day is send back to them a recap as close to word for word of what they just said to me so that they validate this person was hearing me. This person gets me. And you're simply restating the concerns. And one of the biggest things I would tell people also is, as advisors, the biggest trap so many people walk in, Cameron, is they want to solve problems immediately. I tell people all the time, I say this from the stage and in private workshops, you are good problem solvers, but you never solve the problem until they sign the paperwork. You agitate the problem. You are professional problem agitators. So, Cameron, what concerns you the most about that? What will happen if you don't solve that? What's the worst possible thing that will likely happen without a solution? Is that something you'd like my help with? Okay, and then you type, all right, Cameron, you like my help solving this particular problem. And we go through each problem like that. And so the goal is you've solved nothing, but you have solved one thing. You have solved the point that no one ever listened to their problems before. That's what you help solve. Then the summary letter back to them is you're restating, here are the things you want my help with. And I like to jokingly always say, no fee, no me. I became a suddenly incredibly brilliant financial advisor the moment they wrote me a check and signed that fee paperwork. The answers began to flow freely. And what I realized was, if I solve a problem in that initial client visit, when they're still a prospect, they're going to think that I've actually helped them. But what we know as advisors is it's a lifetime of help, a lifetime of pitfalls you're helping clients navigate through and around, and also their kids and generations. So solving one problem in a visit, you may feel good temporarily, but then they never come back and you've lost that client for life. And that is just not right.
Very interesting. So hold back on actually giving them value in the prospect conversation, focus more on identifying the problem, get the paperwork in front of them, and then open the floodgates.
Yeah. And what I would tell you is, again, that may be one of the most controversial things I say, but ultimately your goal is to get them as a client. How you can most help them for the rest of their lives when it comes to their future investment decisions, how they save for their kids' college, whether they launch a business or not, how do they save for retirement, all these key things that you're a part of, the highs and the lows, the deaths, the marriages, all these graduations, all the pieces that the advisor is part of. You've got to make sure that you're giving them value. But I would submit to you a redefinition of value is not solving what appears to be the problem, but solving the underlying problem. That is, oh, you pulled out of me the problems I want solved, and you gave me affirmation and confidence that you could solve them. That to me is a redefinition of value, because then it makes them hungry. You've developed an appetite for them of like, I want what you have because you're going to help me in the bigger scope.
Very interesting. So on that note, on the next gen of client, do you think there's a changing of value from the advisor's end, like a migration away from portfolio management into more of like financial planners or more of like a financial therapist mentality with like a millennial Gen Z audience?
Well, I think is if we look at just generational trends, I think we always have to look at what is everyone's favorite radio station, and that is WIIFM. What's in it for me? What's in it for me? And I think the letter I becomes a bigger capitalized word with every generation, because that's what culture is telling them. It's you. You're it. You're the best. There's nobody better than you. And so ultimately, while you can choose to attack that, ultimately it's best to connect with that. And if that's going to be a person's mentality, not everybody like that, but if that's a common personality, then really asking them about themselves, going back to, hey, what is it that you want? What are the goals that you have? What are the biggest financial fears that keep you awake at night? What's your ideal vision for the future? And I like to talk in terms of questions about helping people identify the pain they're in right now, but also what is the transformation that they want for themselves. And I think for advisors, one of the things that they have to focus on is, if we're being realistic here, the people that are listening to this great podcast, when a prospect comes in, you pretty much could design a financial plan for them in an hour. You pretty much know we're going to do this, 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 this. And that's why you have to hold back saying those things in the visit. It's sort of
Hmm.
like the plumber that gets attacked for charging the $1,000 for the 20-minute fix. And the plumber famously says, well, you're not paying for the 20 minutes. You're paying for the years it took me to figure out how to do this in 20 minutes. It's that
Right.
same analogy. And so for advisors, I think it's very, very important that while the gravitation is to go toward tech, when you have that feeling like, I just need to buy another tech stack, I need to get more, AI integration, all this other stuff. When you begin to have those feelings, that's your cue to say, I need to get more personal. Because ultimately, handwritten notes still stand out more than emails. Ultimately, that scheduled conversation that I like to have with clients. They don't know what's coming, but it's scheduled in my calendar. Hey, Cameron, just was thinking about you. There's a lot of stuff in the market right now. Any questions you've got for me? Okay, no agenda. Just want you to know that we're watching things closely. We'll continue to monitor your portfolio. Have a great day. Boom. So all of those things where they feel like they're part of what you're doing, I think is vital right now.
I think that might tie into a part of your book where you make the case making money isn't just good, it's necessary. Uh, how does tying financial success to a bigger purpose actually help that advisor grow their business?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story. So, a gentleman named Dave came into my office, and on the outside, highly respected, ran a consulting firm locally. But he said, Derek, I'm just not into it anymore. I'm not as excited to go to the office. And for whatever reason, I just asked him this question. I said, Dave, is there a cause that you care deeply about? Well, I could tell the question kind of stunned him. He sat back in his chair and he began to tell me a story. And he said, Derek, a couple years ago, my wife and I and our family went overseas, and this particular village they were at, the tour guide said there is so much poverty in this area, but it's been traced to the lack of one thing. And Dave was like, well, what is it? He said, well, there's no dedicated school building for the children to go to. If they had a dedicated space, it would revolutionize this entire area. And he remembered exchanging this glance with his wife as if to say, wouldn't it be cool to fund that school? Well, they get back to the States, life gets busy. And my question brought this back. And I said, Dave, what if you did this? Something crazy. What if you set an aggressive sales goal to increase your sales by 20% this year, and you took half of that increase and used it to fund that school? Well, now he got invigorated. He was like, "This sounds really cool." So we call it in the book the generosity purpose. He made a tab on his company's website. He kind of mocked up what the school could look like, and what he did is he let his clients know, "Hey, you can work with any consultant in the area, but we love working with you. Just so you know, our generosity purpose is a portion of all of our profits are going to go to fund this school." Well, his clients got excited, and actually, they generated more referrals that way. But what happened was his business grew, but he came in the office. It was going to be 6 months later. It was actually 3 months later. He looked younger. He looked more invigorated, had his A game on. He said, Derek, we've already hit our 20% increase. And part of it was because he tied a cause to it and it got his client base excited about it. But really what happened was Dave himself became remotivated. He was no
Mhm.
longer just working for a job or just to make payroll. Now he was working with a passion. He knew that the more clients we brought on, the more value that we added to them, the more we could help fund that school and help a lot of other people's lives be changed. Well, then his team got excited. He was back in the game again. He was on the verge of wanting to sell his business years ago, but now he was back in, and the goal was, I can make more money to do more good with it. It was no longer the motivation of how do I just pad my bank account and get, 7 or 8 figures and think that's going to buy me happiness and fulfillment. Instead, he realized I'm going to do that and just wake up lonely. But this good money revolution, as I call it, now you give yourself a tangible way to say, not only is money not bad, but money is good because of all the good I can do with it. And what I find is whether you're a founder, a successful CEO, a financial advisor, ultimately burnout is going to be your worst enemy. That's going to be what you're fighting. Why am I doing this? But when you can tie a cause you care about, mine was local education. The more that I can give back, I supported multiple high schools, gave away multiple things to teachers and students, and really had a big interest in investing back in young people locally. So that's what drove me. And so when you have that motivation, you're not just going to just serve a client. Now it's a bigger cause. And that's what I find is really going to be the key, especially for the next generation to grow their businesses, tie a cause to their cash and money to a movement and profits to a purpose.
Very interesting. So to throw that back on you, you built a successful practice up and then you sold it since. What was the catalyst for you to decide to actually sell the firm?
Yeah. So when I think about the actual decision, I began to feel this for a couple years, but one of the things that I've enjoyed doing is being on national TV. And so Fox News, Fox Business, CNBC, I enjoyed that a lot. I enjoyed just the act of being put on the spot and having to break down these complicated topics into very digestible terms so that the average person, hardworking person caring for their family could say, okay, that's a nugget that I understand and can actually do something with. And so things were going so well that Fox Business said, hey, Derek, we'd like to have you have your own show. Well, that was like a crowning moment for me. I was so excited, told my wife about it. We've been working so hard on this. But that dream was crushed by our compliance department when they said, Derek, the answer is no. We can't have you being the spokesperson for the company. What if you say something, et cetera, et cetera? And it hurt deep. It was like a knife that got shoved into my heart. And it wasn't just a one turn, it was a multiple twist. And in that moment, I realized if I'm going to go bigger and do the things in my heart that I want to do, I will need to sell at some point. And, there are lots of advisors that they're kind of in that gray. They want to work a couple days a week. They want to golf the rest. I'm an all in or all out kind of guy. And so I go on a yearly sabbatical every year. I take about 5 days completely by myself to think and pray and journal. And I ask myself a couple key questions. And one is, how do I be a better husband? Number 2 is, how do I be a better father? And number 3, how do I be a better business owner? And those questions guide my time. And as I sat there in the W Hotel in Boston overlooking the harbor, this was July of 2019, I began to write out all the things I would enjoy doing. And I write a best-selling book, which luckily we hit that goal. Launch a podcast, coach, speak, consult, build up another yearly revenue stream of $1 million or above. And shockingly, what wasn't on that list was being a financial advisor. That's when I knew. That's when I knew. It wasn't that I didn't love it. I didn't love my clients and care deeply for them. But it's sort of like that analogy when you watch your favorite athlete and you say to yourself, I wish they would have retired like 2 years ago at the peak. Instead, you're watching their decline. I didn't want to be that person because I knew if I'm feeling this way, I'm going to be doing my clients and my team a disservice. That's when I decided to put my practice for sale. And what I learned was it wasn't about just handing off the clients, it was handing them up. And it was probably the greatest humility lesson I learned because I thought I was a pretty good advisor. Okay. But what I learned was the way that you define success when you sell an advisory practice is for the clients to tell you, hey, Derek, you were good, but we really like the new guy even better. that's what you're playing for. And I thought, well, that really sucks. But ultimately, that was the win because I couldn't just give my clients, it's like my baby that I birthed and took them all the way through adulthood and hand them off to somebody that I wouldn't put my own name to. So those were some of the key things that I've learned along the way. But it really it motivated me. I had to put my back against the wall and say, okay, if you're going to do this, sell it. That gives me a runway then to launch my next new ventures, which are in the process now.
And how's that all been going so far?
It's going good. I mean, I would say I did overestimate that because I had success in growing such a well-respected financial planning business, that success would automatically jump to my next venture. I was wrong. What I learned was that I became a big fish in a small pond, but whenever you make any change, you willingly and for a profit, you say, I'm now a small fish in a big pond. I've got the lessons I learned as a big fish, but now I'm learning to swim differently and faster and be more nimble in different areas. So it's taken longer than I wanted. But what I've learned is it's constantly this battle between the idea that I think is good versus what idea my ideal clients think is good. And ultimately, the better idea is the one that they think is good that they'll pay for.
Absolutely. I mean, founder to founder here, it took us and is taking us longer than I anticipated. And to your point, leaving the ego at the door, I think, was the big epiphany. We're in the tech side, a small fish in a very big pond up against massive billion-dollar firms.
Yes.
But what we have is the ability to be flexible and adaptable where they can't. And if we keep open ears, then that ends up leading to success. But it can take, we've been in conversations with a few firms for like multiple years at this point, and you just hope you have that longevity to actually see it through, because it is a battle. And you hear the successes of those startups where they go and raise millions and millions of dollars, but it appears like it's an overnight success until you dig deeper and see that it actually took them 7 years to get to that point.
Right, right. Well,
Um,
and I think, by the way, I appreciate your vulnerability on that because I think a lot of founders that I interact with and talk with, there's sort of this aura that, well, no, everything's great. And what I find is in business, you sort of think that script plays well, but ultimately other founders like to work with other founders who know that, oh, you're also struggling with that as well. Like you feel isolated and nobody else really understands what you're doing. I get you. And that to me, that develops some deeper relationships that even lead to more business opportunities as well.
100%. I don't know if you've ever seen that meme where there's this like dog in like hell, like flames all around it, and it's the captions, everything's fine.
That's a good description right there.
100%. Well, Derek, why don't we'll pause here. Where's the best place people? Because I think you have a lot of very interesting things to help advisors with. Where's the best place they can connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best place. Derek Kinney, and I've made a goal to post content, 6 to 7 days a week, and I like to call it, non-traditional ways of thinking. It's how I built a 6 7 figure practice, actually in the high seven figures, doing things differently. The other place would be on our Instagram at Derek T Kinney.
Okay, we'll leave a link to the show notes for anyone who's interested in learning more as well. Derek, I really appreciate you coming on today. Very interesting conversation. Probably could have gone to like 2 hours. Hopefully, we can have you on again in the future.
Sounds great. Thanks, Cameron. I really enjoyed the conversation with you. Thanks for having me.